Hello back to everyone. Again, Joel here from my working from home OTC headquarters. My talk today is something that I have been reviewing and evolving, um, but I will explain exactly about it as we move along. For those of you who, again, might have not know me, I'm a tester. I'm been in testing for a while, doing quite a lot of things around testing in the world. My day job is Chief Solution Architect in PractiTest, where I work with all of our customers, a lot of our customers, in order to try to understand how to create a system that answers better to their needs, which means that I get to talk with tons and tons and tons of testers to see how they work. And among my projects, then, obviously, this online test conf, but also the state of testing survey that I have been asking you greatly, and people have been answering that. So I wanted to thank everyone who took the time to start answering the survey, and again, other projects around about the company that I work in. And it's amazing that, to give you an idea, we're trying, and again, I don't want to plug it, but I'm really proud of it. Other than the fact that the support of practice allows us in a great way to bring the OTC to you. It's also a pretty cool product because we're trying to look at testing from another perspective. We're trying to look, and it's something that's aligned with the session that I'm going to be doing today, because we're trying to fix the issues that are going to be affecting testing next. Okay, so yes, we have all the scripted testing, exploratory testing, and graphs and reports and whatever. But it's also focused on the next challenges. How is testing progressing? As Nikhil was saying, shifting left, shifting right, we obviously don't have all the answers, but as Paul Gerard said yesterday, we are listening to customers to understand what they want us to take it. And as Mike Lyles said yesterday, that he's pretty excited about working with PractiTest, I invite everyone to try it out. And if you have questions, you have obviously ways of reaching me, and you don't need to take my word for it. We have a lot of very happy customers with the system, but enough of plugs. I want to ask you something. Has your child, I don't know, daughter, son, someone come and ask you, hey, what are you doing? Well, this happened to me. This happened to me last week when I was working on this presentation. I had the idea, and it's very firm. It's not something that I thought about last week. It's something I have been thinking for concretely the last 6 months. Maybe I have been thinking about this last 6 years, but concretely the last 6 months. And my daughter, this is an old picture of her. I'm not going to put her current picture. Aviv translates to spring. She came and asked me, hey, what are you doing? And I found myself, because I try to work with them as grown-ups as much as I can. And I told her that I'm making a presentation about the future of my job, about the future of testing and how I see the future of testing works. And she went over and she asked me, well, that's silly. How can you actually predict the future? And my daughter, she's 11, so she's a pre-teenager, and she's skeptic about the world, and she thinks that she understands everything. So if you say that I'm working on predictions, then magically she goes into a magic ball and says, hey, you're speaking nonsense right now. So I went over her, and again, I worked with her very seriously, and I said, no, wait a second, actually, that's what I'm doing. And let me explain to you my process. And it was the first time that I actually distilled my process to her. And I think that it was a great opportunity. And a lot of my quote unquote discoveries or realizations come from talking to people and then understanding what just happened. So my train of thought when I try to think about the future, it's actually quite simple. I try, first of all, I'm a kind of a geek of history. And I've learned that everything that happens usually is an evolution of patterns. And to give you an idea, I was listening to a great podcast on the French Revolution. The French Revolution was not a revolution, it was an evolution. It just took place quickly for the time, but the ideas were brewing a lot, and the discontent with the crown was brewing for a long time. And it was not about the crown more than it was about the fact that the people in Paris didn't have food. So it's looking into those patterns that have been happening in the past. It's trying to understand that vector, meaning if you look at all the patterns and you plot them, then you get an idea of a vector, of a current direction of where the world is taking you. Then again, you look into those patterns and you try to understand out of those patterns which are the most influential factors, because it's never one factor. It's never one thing that brings an outcome. It's usually the convergence of multiple factors. So here is the part where the guess starts. Obviously in the direction, but also on which of the factors is going to be influential, and try not to be blind spotted by a factor that you're not taking into account yet, because again, surprise is the name of the game. And then you just make an educated guess. But it's an educated guess based on all of these points. And consciously and unconsciously, I have been thinking about that on testing. And you know what? It started maybe 10 years ago when I was sitting in a large conference room here in Tel Aviv where I work, and I was sitting with some colleagues of mine, a couple of one VP of quality, a number of directors of quality, many managers of quality. And the topic that we were discussing was the influence of Agile back then. We're coming still very strong on waterfall, and we're coming to Agile. And I remember the discussion being this large director of quality that I appreciate. Again, he's a very cool guy, but not sure if I ever agreed with him on the ways he saw testing. But he was like, no, it's not going to hold water because testers cannot manage themselves. And I'm not willing to let them basically take my, I don't remember if it was 60 or 80 testers under him and just distribute them, because it's not going to work. And Agile's just going to pass, and it's not going to hold water, and I'm not worried about it. Yeah, and how did that actually work? We all know what happened, meaning there was an evolution. It wasn't as simple as we thought. No, it was not breaking up the 9 months that took us to test into now. A lot of things had to change, but things change. And back then was when I started seeing that things change, and you need to look outside the box to understand. So our evolution started, at least when I started testing, it was waterfall, and then we started adopting V models. And then I remember being working in Silicon Valley at the beginning of the 2000s and listening about XP, as in extreme programming, and reading about it sounded really cool, but undoable. And then we started with Agile, and it became very doable. And then we got into DevOps. And I think that many of us are living the DevOps reality. And it's a good reality, but it's a very different from where we started back in Waterfall. So this is our current evolution. I think that our vectors are also very interesting. Our vectors are, as we're talking about DevOps, maybe even modern testing and the principles guiding that kind of stuff, that's on the methodological perspective. But as I mentioned, vectors are actually multiple that are influencing on them. Another one is cloud computing. The fact that everything right now, and it's very related to DevOps, but everything actually is running on the cloud. We don't ship CD-ROMs. We don't, well, we do install mobile devices, but it's still the fact that, and we will get to that, but the fact that we manage our servers and we can monitor them and we can fix them, meaning the cost of defects have been going down, then that's a very big influencing vector. We have all of the CI/CD, automation, testing, all of that, let's say, mechanization of testing, that it's very, very real. And for those people who are not on that wave, you're missing it. And it's not only about running Selenium scripts. It's not only about using Postman or Robot Framework for your API test cases. It's about generating a framework that will use Jenkins and Dockers or again, Circle, we personally use Circle, and generate an infrastructure that will help you with your test automation scripting in order to allow us to work faster because we have stability, not because we have testing, because we're achieving stability quickly with that. And obviously there's the mobile revolution. So all of those, I think, are currently affecting or influencing us. And obviously there are plenty others. And you might say, oh, microservices might be one. I don't know. Others might be, if we think about all sorts of networks and stuff like that. Obviously, AI and ML, all of that is actually influencing us. I think, though, that the most influential factors at the end of the day, and that is what brought Agile into place. Agile did not come because it was faster or sexier or easier. No, Agile came because people started competing, companies started competing, and no one could wait 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 18 months to have a new version. We needed to work faster. And so we came up with a process that allowed us to work faster, given the fact that we could bend a little bit of the rules that we had back there. So most influential business factors today, if we fast forward to where we are right now, I think that the biggest one is that there is what I call hyper competition. And again, leave testing aside, forget about testing. Think about the business world. Every service, every application, every website, you don't have one. You have 5 that are on the top tier, and another 150 that are on other tiers, evolving and digressing all the time. There's no big winner anywhere, okay? Without, again, some small exceptions, but there's hyper competition. With hyper competition comes what I like to define as low customer user loyalty, which is not a bad thing. Let me explain what that means. It means that if when I used to fly a place, you get to an airport, you're not taking a rental, and you open Uber and you look for an Uber, no Uber, a minute later you're on Lyft. Meaning it's that simple. It's our kids. My kids, they start with Netflix. They don't see anything in Netflix, they go to Amazon Prime. There's nothing on Prime, they will go to YouTube. It's seamless how from that hyper competition, you just move from one another. Now, it's the same way, for example, I do meditation. I have 2 meditation apps in my system, in my phone right now. And there are another 3 that I've tried and left out. Okay, and which one do I use? I don't know, whichever I like to do. So we have a lot of different services, and it's incredibly easy to move from one another. And this is influencing our work. They're individually customized applications. And I'm not even talking about the fact that it's creepy that Facebook knows what I was talking with my wife and pitches me, I don't know, car repair shops because I was talking about the car. I'm talking here about the fact that we're very close to the place where, and we have it. Again, I was talking about my health care, my health habits applications. It's very much based on the information in my phone about what I do and how much I exercise or not, or stuff like that. And this is going to be more and more and more. Applications are going to be individually customized. Not only what we're shown as advertisement, but how they react. So it's becoming even more complex. Obviously, everything is internet driven, which means that it's fast. It happens seamlessly where you are. And we have globalization, meaning that if I can work here, I can work anywhere. And if there's anything that COVID has proven, even to me, is that I can hire someone anywhere in the world, and I don't really care where they are. And this was only in addition to the fact that if I was to be flying around the world, it doesn't really matter where I am. I expect the same things to behave the same way. Okay, so all of these business factors are extremely influential and are dictating testing in many, many ways, or at least our job. Now, but based on those what are my educated guesses? How is this going to influence what we do? And a lot of it has been what people have been saying all along. And we can start yesterday from listening to how Paul Gerard was talking about AI and ML helping us not to run tests better, but to think about testing better and to come up with tests. And we can go to Anne-Marie as she was saying how we need to modify the roles that we have. We need to start looking at testing, not as the operation of testing, but more as the function of quality. We need to understand that testing is a commodity and it's work that everyone can and should do. And yes, we can become coaches, but the question is what happens after we don't need to do testing is, and if I go back to that director of quality that I mentioned 5 minutes ago, that he was saying, well, I'm going to be out of a job because I'm not going to be having my 40/60/100 people to manage. No, you will have a job, meaning if I used to be a director of quality and now I'm going to be in charge of quality, actually, we're giving you a job of higher influence because we need that higher influence in quality. Without quality, we're not going to be able to compete in that hyper competitive market where user loyalty is extremely low. So my educated guess is that for some of us tomorrow, for many of us 3 years from now, I think that for all of us in about 10 years, we will be looking at quality in a very, very different way. And I want to talk about some of the aspects that I think are going to be happening there. First of all, and this is a reality for many of us, we need to work with a slimmer and improved testing process. It doesn't mean we cannot waste any time because we don't have any time to waste. What does it mean? It doesn't mean the testing is shrinking. If you were in my workshop earlier, then you saw something similar to this slide. If these used to be, let's say, and again, forget if it's 50% manual coverage, 50% automation coverage. This used to be what we used to do before, let's say, waterfall, waterfallish. Then now that we're in DevOps, we're not only, yes, the part of manual and automation is going down a little bit, but overall, we're expanding our testing coverage. Because if we work smart enough and we use our production information, then the quality that we can reach in our applications is going to be quite higher than anything that we were able to achieve before. Even if pre-release we're testing less, overall we're testing quite a lot more because we have access to the data in production, because we see people working in our sites, because if there's an exception, a bug on the system, we don't need to depend on the user reporting it instead of just dropping the application. We can see it in our servers. But all of that only if you're careful enough, only if you planned it, okay? What I'm saying here is that this model is wrong, okay? This is the traditional DevOps model, and it's not very wrong, but it's slightly wrong, at least on the way that we can look at it. Up to now, the idea is that, oh, we have the planning stages with our user stories, and then we went into coding, so the developer is going to be working on that. We build it. Oh, and then it comes to testers. Then we go ahead and test it. And then, obviously, after it has been tested enough, we release it. It's being deployed. We operate it, and we monitor what's going on in there. Yes and no. Let's start here. First of all, it's not that we test after we coded and built. Testing needs to happen all over this area. We're going to be testing our user stories. We're going to be testing our code, obviously. We're going to be testing our builds. Then after all of that is done, we will have a period of sanitation, okay, where we're going to make sure that things are working okay. But if we leave testing towards the end, it's not what we intended, and it's not what's going to make our process lean. By the way, it also means that we're not going to be doing most of the testing because most of the testing will happen even before it goes into sanitation, even if this is done by a tester. By the way, exactly the same happens on the second side. If you look in here, it's not that monitor happens at the end. No, definitely no. We're monitoring the heck out of our systems when we release them, obviously when we deploy them. The most important monitoring happens on deployment, because the bugs will happen on deployment or around deployment. You don't wait until after for that. And you will keep monitoring when you're operating, because you want to make sure that you understand that people are actually working with the system and working correctly. And And so what we might have after, let's say towards the start of the planning process, we will look into all of these monitoring and try to analyze what we can take of it. But this becomes our new quality process, our new testing process. Both testing and monitoring become testing, and we need to be on top of that because it has become our bread and butter. And if I look into it, I remember I listened to the A/B testing podcast, Alan Page and Brent Jensen over there, and it started to make sense when Brent started talking that he was not a tester anymore. He actually became a data scientist. Testers in monitoring are data scientists because we have tons and tons and tons of data, and we need to understand what's going on in there. And we need to understand that testing is not only finding the exceptions and the bugs on the code, but also analyzing user behavior in order to understand where there's quality and where can we improve the quality so that people can use our systems more. Slim and so in synthesis, a slim and improved testing process means that we have a clearly defined testing and monitoring strategy. There needs to be a strategy set up by someone. That someone is the QA architect. That's the person who has the whole orchestrating visibility into that. That means that all of our testing has to be coordinated, started from unit test, integration test, automation, manual efforts. We don't have time to waste. So if something was covered in unit testing, we shouldn't even cover it in automation. Obviously, we shouldn't cover it in manual efforts, but we should put those manual efforts on the areas that are less covered on that. Okay, so it needs to be highly efficient and extremely coordinated. We also need to enable stability throughout the whole process. What I mean by this, yeah, so we have a developer who's actually working on a feature and he's running his unit test and all good and fine. Oh, but we forgot to test the integration with other areas. And if we're going to run into that only during that manual sanitation, we're too late. We just created a mini waterfall. We need to make sure that if we have an integration system, if you have a CI, make it a CI. And make sure that, okay, so your regression tests, automatic regression tests are too large, so it's not feasible to run them every build. Run them once a night. Parallelize them. Okay, or do continuous testing, whatever you can do. But make sure that you enable stability throughout the whole process. And again, that is the job of the QA architect. It's not a tester's job. It's a higher level job. Another thing that we need to do as QA architects is stop looking at the product, at the finished good, and start looking at the process. What I mean by that, what you're seeing here are two ways of making bread. One of them is when I'm only making one piece of bread at a time, and I'm an artisan working at home or on a boutique shop or something like that, and I'm looking into how I make everything and it's manual, and I can fix and slash and do, and time is not of an essence. Also, scalability is not of an essence. We're not there anymore. We are releasing tens of user stories a week, maybe a day. Well, not tens a day, but multiple a day, many a week. We are closer to a factory of code and factory of user stories than we are to a boutique where each feature we could have invested I don't know how much time. We don't need to as well. We can look at it differently. The only way, something you might not know, by profession I'm an industrial engineer. That's what I studied in college. And they explain to you that what you need to have is a repeatable process. It might not be the best process, but it's fully repeatable so that if there's anything that doesn't match, then you can just fine tune it. It's good enough for the masses. That's where we need to be. Obviously, we need to be extremely good enough, but it needs to be something that is repeatable, and it's not based on the people working on this. It's based on the process that you're applying. You need to have the right people, but it's not going to be dependent on them. What does it mean? Well, it means that we need to start, first of all, from the very beginning. We need to start not by the end. You're not going to be injecting quality at the end. You need to be validating user stories, making sure that everything's aligned from the very beginning. You need to make sure that instead of focusing on actual issues, and I'm stealing this from modern testing and Alan and Brent again, and the community, you need to fix bottlenecks, meaning if you're going to be releasing fast, then focus on the places where you're getting stuck. You shouldn't be working on testing, but test enablement. As I said, you're not dependent on anyone, not even your testers. A lot of coaching, a lot of environment creation, a lot of practices definitions. And I have a number of sessions that I can do on that, and send me a link and I'll be happy to talk about them. And we need to talk about how are we going to be measuring those development and deployment practices. It needs to become more of a science than an art. And the only way for something to become a science is if you have a process that you can measure and continue improving. Okay? Scientific method, again, I have 3 kids, so I was working with my older son on the scientific method. You need to have a process that you can actually go and continue working on it. You need to have a hypothesis that you improve, you prove, or disprove with time. So sorry. So this is the parts on process instead of, as we used to do in waterfall, so you have a given product. Now go ahead and test the heck out of it in order to make sure that it's clean. No, we're not working like that. I will feel comfortable enough the moment that we're releasing user stories without myself as a tester even looking at it, just looking at the measurements coming from it and trusting the rest of my team, developers, and whoever else is doing in order to do their jobs, okay? We shouldn't be bottlenecks, or people shouldn't be dependent on us. One of the things that we need to understand also is that when you look at the complete process, then you need to start looking at quality from a higher level and measurements of quality from a higher level. And in this case, is focusing on the whole user story process and how can we have measurements throughout the whole process in here. So starting first of all, making sure that every time we have a feature, we have a value hypothesis. And Anne-Marie mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, but I want to make it more concrete here. Whenever we have a new user story, it needs to improve the product. If it's not going to be adding the value of the product, then you need to ask the business question, why are we doing it? Now, if you say, oh, this is an infrastructure fix, okay, so it still has a business value. It will allow us to increase something. It's something that you can measure. So you need to have a feature value hypothesis of what value is this feature going to be having, and it needs to be something that is measurable. This will be something that you can count and verify, because then you will want to take this value hypothesis and you want to benchmark it and make sure that you instrument how to check it. Okay, for example, if our hypothesis is that we're adding a feature that will make our reports easier to use. So my assumption here, or my hypothesis, is that people will use more reports. So if up to now I know that my average user created, I'm making this up, 3.5 reports a week, then I'm guessing that from now on we will be making 5 reports a week, on average at least. So I need to be able, first of all, to benchmark, to understand where I was before, and to instrument to make sure that I will be able to measure where we are after. Because if you cannot validate your hypothesis, then how do you know? Then obviously we need to take the user story and test pre-release. That's what we usually do, and we know how to do it. I don't need to go into that. But then we need to start measuring production. It's not a matter, after you release, after it's been deployed, you don't stop there. You start there by measuring in production, and you reach the conclusions on whether the hypothesis was correct and what do you want to do moving forward. By the way, most times that hypothesis is not going to be correct because we are optimists. But you usually get a grade and usually get ideas of where you can continue improving. Because if you wanted to improve, to work on reports, was because you think that you have an issue there. So continue measuring and try to understand where those issues are. So again, looking into quality as, who said it yesterday? Paul, I think. No, Mike said that, no, or Paul, I don't remember. It's value in the eyes of someone who cares. Okay, so this is the way to understand on the aggregated scale, because we don't have one customer. We have hopefully hundreds of thousands of them. We need to aggregate their value, but do it in a concrete manner. I mentioned deployment quality. And I think that this is extremely important. If you look into most SaaS systems, the vast majority of the issues that we find in systems during deployment happens during the deployment. And most accidents happen on liftoff or landing in airplanes. It's the same exactly in software. Most of the incidents that we catch will happen either when we're deploying or at the very beginning of deployment, okay? It's not that they wouldn't happen later, but they start happening from the very beginning. We don't need to wait quite a lot, okay? If we have good measurements, then we can do it before. So it's the best way of staying as close to the issues as possible. What does this mean? It means that we need to have a very good deployment strategy. Every user story is different. Every deployment strategy is going to be different. Some will require database migration. Some of them will require integration changes. Some of them will force us to modify the way users are working. So maybe we need to do some training on them. You need to make sure that every deployment strategy matches the user story. Obviously, you need to test it. You don't only test the deployment, you test the rollback. Because you need to know, you need to assume that 1 every 10 deployments, something will go wrong. It might be 1 every 20 or 1 every 5, but it will go wrong once in a while. You need to make sure that after you deploy, you need to know how to roll it back, because if something hits the fan, you don't have time to think. You need to roll it back as soon as you can. And remember, there's no one rollback. Some rollbacks will be just an executable, a script that we need to modify. Some of them will require a full database dump and restore. And you have everyone in the middle. Is there going to be downtime? No downtime. All of that needs to be tested so that we can do it fast. Obviously, manage the process and monitor the heck out of it. Every single thing that is happening, I think that I have it here. Oh, we'll get to that in a second, but we need to monitor a lot. And obviously at the beginning you monitor more and then you monitor less. And I was saying this in my workshop, there needs to be this understanding that when you're deploying something, there's no such thing as, oh, I'm going to hit deploy and then go for lunch. No, guys, you hit deploy, you open your screen and you wait patiently for the first minute with the button ready to roll back. First 5 minutes, very close to the monitor. First 30 minutes, you stay in the room, making sure that nothing red will go on. But be ready, monitor the process, not because you like the show that it's showing, but because you might need to roll it back and you need to do it fast. The best way to measure value is to measure if people are working with your product. If your product has good value and good quality, then people will use it. How do you know that people like your feature? Because they use it more. How do you know that people like your product? Because they recommend it more. If they recommend it more, you have more users. It's really simple if you look at it. So we need to constantly monitor application and user health on that. Now, how does it work? Well, straightforward. We have been talking about that. We need to make sure that we have instrumentation. You need to be able to measure. I'm not saying everything, but almost everything. And if you can, there are all sorts of applications that don't only measure what you're doing, they measure the paths that you're taking throughout the process, so they give you quite a lot more visibility into that. I suggest, strongly suggest, that you define monitoring strategies for application areas, meaning, let's say, for specific modules, but also monitoring strategies for flows. Okay, so this is not only for ERP systems. It can be a flow of, I'm using PractiTest. What comes to mind, the flow might be, I create a test case, I add it to a test set, and I run my test case on the test set. Check how it's working. Look at those main paths, story paths, and make sure that you're monitoring. What do you monitor for? Well, simple stuff. First of all, how much is being used? How long is it taking? Is it being used more or less? What can I learn from that? And also go ahead and monitor specific user groups, especially if you have strategic user groups or strategic customers. For example, maybe I can define my account champions. I want to monitor those. If they stop working with the system, then it's very, very important for me to understand why. Segment data as much as you can. All the monitoring that you're doing segmented by verticals, by horizontals, by any way that you can do, by type of customer, by health of customer, by age of customer, because you're not monitoring for the sake of monitoring, you're monitoring for the sake of information, and then you're able to generate dashboards. Dashboards need to be as simple as possible, but actionable. So if you have something that was green yesterday and it turned yellow today, make sure that it's easy for that person to understand what changed in order to make it yellow. If it went from green to red, what made that change? Everything needs to be very action-driven in that sense. And I think that it comes without saying, because I have been saying that throughout the whole process, it's that we need to work with the business and for the business. I'm going to make it as simple as possible. If any of the operations that you're doing do not translate to the bottom line of your company, again, today or tomorrow, it doesn't need to be today, then why are you doing it? Meaning, why are we running a test that we know that has close to zero value for that? Isn't there something else that we can do? If you tell me, well, because certification requires it, then, well, maybe you're doing it because certification and certification has value, but at least it needs to be there. It's like the question that if I find a bug that I know it's not going to be fixed, should I report it? Well, I think not. Well, what happens if in the future it's important? Then you report it, because in the future it's important. You're not going to be reporting a bug only to clutter the database on something. So all of that, all of those things become important. So if I don't have time to run test cases on all my browsers, then I will be very, very sure about not running specific browsers and saying, well, if there's anything, we'll find it in production. It's okay as long as you understand how you do it, as long as you understand how to work with the business. First of all, understand what is required to make decisions. So let's say that it's very important for us to release a specific feature right now. Do I need to put more testers on that? Do we need to test it better? Every feature, it will depend on what part is required or not. Meaning, the question, hey, what defines a showstopper for this feature today? It's extremely relevant, because that is where you need to be focusing. Okay, so make sure that you understand what is required in order to make decisions. Everything that you measure, every report that you make, try to look at the concrete business needs. So let's go back over to our user health. We're not doing user health because we want to have a better benchmark of the response time. We only want to do a benchmark of the response time if we know that it has some value to the business. Maybe that's not what's valuable right now. Maybe what they want to see is if there's any specific type of account that we need to work with them more because they're very successful with the system, okay? Or if we're releasing a new MVP, then how can we actually make it better? So we need to work for the system on that. We need to be able to provide both information as well as intelligence, where information, the difference between information and intelligence is that information is raw. Intelligence usually takes more than one data point, and it also has analysis on that. So if I see that, for example, I see some reports of user data going down on a specific area of my product. Let's say that people are using less this area of the product. And I can also correlate that to some accounts going dormant in my application. Then I can try to collect between them and the intelligence, because of some issues that we're having in this area of the system, then we're seeing some negative effect on accounts. So we need to go ahead and understand if those accounts are important to us, and then we're going to be working on that. Try to bring more than only the raw data over the table. And something that we're very good at and not other organizations are, let's try to look for information in other sources. I'll give you some examples. Other sources sometimes are other departments. So it's not only about looking at the amount of clicks on the system, but also trying to correlate that with support calls, maybe. Correlate that with sales, correlate that with customer success or customer professional services time. Try to look for that. When you try to give information about a feature, a bug, or a user story, it's interesting that many times testers know more about the competition than anyone else because we're curious by nature. So yeah, it's product marketing should be doing that kind of intelligence checkup. But many times you will talk to a tester and they will say, yeah, well, I was looking at this competitor and they have this pretty cool feature that I like. Try to look into those other areas of information and try to put it on there. It's not a matter of, is it my place in the organization to do it or not? It's a matter of, if I think that I have value, then I should put it there. It's my responsibility. Now, most importantly, it's about understanding that we need to up our game and we need to up our value. We're not working on the testing anymore, at least not solely on the testing anymore. We're looking into the quality process in order to generate a quality product that is repeatable. As in, try to take again that way of looking at it, from moving from a place that makes one bread at a time to a factory that is actually making tons and tons of buns all the time. The only way to do it is to transition from focusing on each individual bun that I'm making into the process that I'm doing. So that is what we need to do. The actual work, the work itself, will depend on your team. Where you are on the maturity level, what type of technologies do you have, who is doing other stuff. Maybe there are things that other people are already doing, so don't spend your time on that. Look for other places where it can actually work. It's more about leading than it is about doing. When you're working on the processes, it's more about generating the change and leading that change. You're not going to be able to force someone to do something different by example. Many times you lead by example, but you need to make sure that you convince those people that is the thing that needs to be done. Take small steps, start with quick wins, because it'll give you legitimacy. It will make people believe that what you're doing is right and has a reason for being. So that it's extremely important. Don't start the long range works at the beginning. Start by making sure that people understand that there's something to what you're saying right now. Get as much feedback as you can. Don't assume you know what you're doing. Assume that you know that something needs to be done. Then check that. Meaning, it's just like the value hypothesis we need to have on user stories. You need to have a value hypothesis on the efforts you're doing. Then you do it, then you get feedback, and then you make it better by adapting your efforts. Okay? And most importantly, again, understand what you're doing and make sure that you're critical of yourself and not only of the application or others. So that is what I wanted to bring here. I want people to understand that there is a future of testing. Testing is not dead, but what we call testing today, I think that we're going to be calling it more quality engineering. And so just as we have security architects and application architects and, I don't know, load architects or performance architects, we're going to be having more and more software quality architects. And our job is going to be to orchestrate the process from the quality perspective, to make sure that we're measuring, improving, and doing that all the time in all the possible areas. Okay? So that is what I think. And again, I wish all of us luck on that. And if you have any questions, again, agree with me, disagree with me, this is my personal email. Go ahead and send. Some people have been already sending me emails, and I appreciate that. But I'm even happier not only to get people saying, hey, I agree with you, but people saying I don't agree with you, and this is why, because it just makes my thoughts a little bit better all the time. And you can read more about what I have to say on my QA blog.